All right, and we are live on the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. Hello, everybody. It's Corey DeAngelis, your host, the executive director at the Educational Freedom Institute. And with me, of course, is the co-host, Matthew Nielsen, the founder of the Educational Freedom Institute and the president of the board as well. We have a very special guest with us today. It's Representative from Georgia, Wes Cantrell, and he was actually he was the primary sponsor on a recent bill in the Georgia House Bill 60, which was a bill that intended to fund students as opposed to institutions through education choice scholarships. So thank you so much, Representative Cantrell, for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you guys.
Yeah, great. Could you give us a little bit of a background of just maybe your interest in school choice or the reason behind kind of introducing this bill, and then take us a little bit through what the bill actually said. And we're talking about House Bill 60. And then after that, if you want to just give us a little bit of a background on what went down with the bill and a little bit more information.
Yeah, well, Corey, first of all, what people need to know is that education, the passion for education runs really deep in my family. My grandparents were educators. My grandfather was a principal, and he hired a young lady teacher. He liked her. He married her. She became my grandmother. My mother served on the State Board of Education in Georgia back in the 80s under Governor Joe Frank Harris. And I taught school. I went to youth ministry. I'm a minister by trade. So I went to youth ministry. But if I had not gone to youth ministry, I would have spent my entire adult life, I'm sure, as some type of educator. I did teach school in the public schools primarily for about 8 years back in the early 2000s. And I have a son who's a public school educator right now. So I tell people all the time, I'm all about public school, but I'm also all about giving, families options for those kids that need them. So when I got elected 7 years ago, I went to the, we affectionately refer to it as Jeb Fest, I guess, what are they? Excellence in Ed? Is that the name of the?
Yeah, Excel in Ed. Yeah, Jeb Fest.
Yeah. So I went to that the first year I got elected. I had never heard of ESAs. Well, I knew about we have a special education scholarship here. We have a tax credit scholarship here. I'd never heard of ESAs. And I heard about that for the first time at that conference. I was like, man, this is the holy grail for school choice. It gives you the most options possible for a family. And it really allows you to cater, it's not just tuition. It's, it's something all complete where you do a cafeteria approach to really, meet the particular needs of your child. So I came back just fired up about ESAs, and I introduced the bill. Oh gosh, I guess 4 or 5 years ago now. My third year. This is my 7th year down here. So 4 years ago, and I found out quickly that there wasn't much of an appetite for it here in the General Assembly, and the Republicans had a pretty almost a super majority then. I think we were at 118, 119 out of 180, and I just was naive. I thought, oh golly, we're all going to be on board with this. It's going to be so easy. And sorry, I have one of those motion sensors on the lights, but I'm in a government building, so they're trying to save as much energy as possible. So I introduced the bill, and a lot of opposition from my colleagues. Obviously, the Democrats were pretty much locked down against it. I had 3 Democrats that supported it. But I found out real quick that the education lobby is by far the most powerful lobby in our state. And it's not because of money. It's because of relationship, intimidation. They're very well organized. And I say all these things as a compliment. I'm not complaining. They really know how to lobby legislators. And so I worked the bill really hard, and the speaker allowed me to get to the floor for a vote. I went to the floor at 12:45 a.m. on what's known as crossover day, the last day the bill can come out of the House. And the vote was at 1:30 a.m. and I got slaughtered. I only got 60. We have 180 members. I don't know how many were there at that time of day, probably 160 or 5, and I got 60 votes. I barely got half of my own caucus. So I realized there's something here as far as there's an education issue. A lot of my colleagues were confused about what the bill did. They thought ESA, they were thinking, this college savings plan.
Oops.
So I realized I had a big job in front of me. So I worked really hard the next year, the next session, and we had got a new senator on board, and I wrote the bill, and he carried it over in the Senate because we felt like it would be easier to get through the Senate first, get a lot of publicity, and then maybe be able to bring some pressure to bear in my chamber. And unfortunately, we had a brand new lieutenant governor, and there was a lot going on politically behind the scenes. And that bill failed on the floor by, I think, 3 votes in the Senate. So it was very disappointing. So this year I brought it back again. And, I'm just a glutton for punishment. I love beating my head against the wall. But I had a lot of new allies this year amongst colleagues who had been against it a few years ago because of the pandemic and just the resentment that they had for these systems that are just, failing our kids. It's just unbelievable what some of our school systems, the decisions they're making not to provide school. I live in a school system. We blazed the trail. Cherokee County was one of the very first school systems in the nation to open up. We got a lot of national news that wasn't positive because of some pictures kids took on crowded hallways and seniors.
Was that in your county?
That was my county. It wasn't in my district, but it was in my county. And our school board did a great job, man. They didn't succumb to the pressure. They stuck it out. We had some. My son teaches in the system there, and we had some schools that had to pause temporarily. Some had to go to a hybrid model temporarily. Mostly it was high schools, where the kids were because of the contact tracing and everything. The elementary schools and the middle schools did great until Christmas break, and they didn't get it at school. They got it over the Christmas holidays, and it wasn't students. It was teachers and administrators that made it impossible because we couldn't get enough subs. So they had to go virtual for 2 weeks. But other than that, they've been in person pretty much 100% of the time. So I'm very proud of my county. But anyway, tell me if I'm rambling, man. I'm talking a lot.
No, this is great. It makes it easier on us. But how did the kind of battle go this year? I know you passed it out of committee 12-10.
I did. And it was
committee vote, and then.
Yeah, it was a fight to get it out of committee. I mean, we had 16-8 Republicans, and I got it out 12-10. That gives you any indication. With one Democrat voting in favor of the bill. We've got a brand new Democrat colleague. She's awesome, and she told the story in committee of her. She moved from Sandy Springs, which is the area that I grew up in, just north of Atlanta. It's a very affluent area, and we have over 2,000, I forget, 2,200 elementary schools in Georgia, public schools. And her daughters attended a top 10 public school in Sandy Springs. Well, they moved to where she grew up to an Atlanta public school to the bottom 10 school. And so immediately she began having some problems with her daughters. So she went to her school board member and she said, "Hey, what are we going to do? I need some help with my daughter. She was doing great before, and now we're really struggling." And that school board member had the audacity to say, "You just need to move back to Sandy Springs." And it was just a powerful testimony of exactly what we're trying to help families with when they're trapped in an environment that's just not working for their kids. Sometimes it's the school's fault. Sometimes it's a learning style. It could be all kinds of things. I try not to point the finger, but just to point towards solutions more, focus on the solution more than the problem. But barely got it out of committee, thought I had momentum, and I just couldn't get the votes. And so it never came to the floor. If it had come to the floor, it would have lost. I need 91 votes. I think I probably had 80. I wasn't real far away. But better to live and fight another day. I mean, we're in the first year of a 2-year session, so I can still, the bill's still alive because we haven't voted it yet. So I can bring it back next year. It's funny. I've been trying to thread the needle to make enough people happy to get this thing passed. So I've got the specifics of the bill is that it would take the state portion of that student's funding, put it in an account administered by the state with pre-approved vendors. They'd have to apply to be approved. So the money would never touch the family's hands. It would go directly to the private school, the teacher, the textbook company, whatever it might be. And it would apply to students who are in the bottom 25% of schools, students who are in below 20% of the poverty level, which is about $50,000 a year for a family of four. So low income families, students who are in a foster care or have been adopted out of foster care. They've been moved around a lot. Students from an active military family, they've been moved around a lot. Special needs. We already have a special needs scholarship, but special needs families tell me all the time, there's not a public or a private school within driving distance that meets the needs of my child. So private school tuition is not the answer for me. I need tutoring. I need someone to come to the house. I need therapy. I need some online type stuff. And so that's the beauty of the ESA versus the special needs scholarship, which we currently have. And then last category was those who attended a school that had been closed to in-person instruction for at least a semester. So, it was pretty high.
So you covered a lot of the bases there, Representative. It makes me wonder, what were some of the hangups? Because, you covered a lot of the hangups that people have.
No, there's one hangup, Matthew. Mm-hmm. One hangup. I think you probably know what it is.
I do.
All the superintendents blasting 20,000 emails and sending emails to all of their staff to tell them that you're going to get fired or you're going to lose your job to competition if this program passes, even though it's a small program targeted to the least advantaged.
And I was capped at 0.25% of the current enrollment, 4,300 kids out of 1.7 million, and the cap would add 0.25% each year for 10 years to cap out at 2.5%. Of the entire enrollment, and yet that was,
it almost makes
about as conservative as you can get on a bill. I don't know what else you could have done.
Listen, let me tell you this: if I had $1 for every time one of my colleagues said to me, "Wes, I love your bill, but my superintendent told me if I vote for your bill, they'll never speak to me again." I had one of my colleagues, and she really wanted to vote for the bill, and I think she probably would have on the floor. She told me that she represents 4 counties, and all 4 superintendents came to her house to visit her about this bill.
They are so terrified of losing a few students. It is just insane. What does that tell you about how they feel, that what they believe about what parents feel about their schools? It's just,
I know. And
crazy how hard they fight to go to your house with other superintendents. Just imagine if a corporation just started freaking out like that and said, "Oh no, you can't go shop at McDonald's." McDonald's starts saying, "Oh no, I'm going to knock on your door and say you can't go eat at Burger King today because you're going to put me out of business." It's all good. You had to stop me.
Come on, right. Mike. Oh,
that's crazy.
I had to dance around and get it to come back on.
well, Wes, it almost makes me think that, if they're going to fearmonger this much about a bill that's limited and pretty much still protects them from competition, and if they're going to bring that same energy, we might as well just propose something that actually is wide open and universal, and because they're going to act the same either way.
I agree. And 3 years ago, the first time I heard about ESAs, a colleague of mine who was on his way out introduced universal ESAs, and it never got out of committee.
All this begs the question, though, Wes. Why do you hate public schools so much?
I know. That's what's so terrified about it, is because I could, when I got elected, we have a formula here for funding public education. It's called QBE, Quality Basic Education Formula. And it's never been fully funded in the history of our state. It was instituted in the 80s. So under Democrat control from the 80s till the early 2000s, it was never fully funded. Then I got elected in 2014, and I didn't know any better. I'm just this young, naive, well, not young, but this naive politician. And so when I got down here, I found out we were $137 million short of fully funding QBE. And in the big, that's a lot of money, clearly, but in the in a $40 billion budget, it's a blip. So I made an appointment with the governor, and I went down and saw him and said, "Hey, Mr. Governor, 137 million. We've got at that point we had like 1.5 billion in the rainy day fund." I said, "Even if you want to take it out of the rainy day fund, let's put it in the budget." And he didn't want to do it. And so we didn't do it. And so then I went to my education committee and I got everybody to sign a letter. Let's beg the governor to fully fund QBE. And he still didn't do it. And then all of a sudden we had a little extra money at the end of the year, which often happens. And he applied that money and we fully funded QBE. So I texted my superintendent and I said, "Hey, we just fully funded QBE for the first time in history. I had nothing to do with it, but I want all the credit." So, because I have a good relationship with my superintendent, I'm with them 99% of the time, but just this one issue, they just can't. That would help kids, and I just don't get it. So,
well, a lot of the people that vote, yeah, I mean, a lot of the people that vote against funding students directly, they vote for funding students directly as long as it's for other things like pre-K programs or higher education with Pell Grants and the GI Bill,
right,
or food stamps where you fund people rather than buildings. It's just weird to me that only when it comes to K-12 education, people freak out about it. And I think it's only because of this special interest that profits from getting the money regardless of the choice of the family. I mean, you'd probably have the same kind of opposition if in higher education, everybody had to go to the community college if they wanted to use Pell Grants, for example.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. And, the thing that's, Florida is to our south. And, when Governor Bush, after his first term, and they began to implement some real serious choice. In 2003, you took the major indicators and you averaged them. Florida and Georgia were on a pretty equal footing. Florida was 36, we were 40. Well, since 2003, they've killed it. Okay. They've got more kids in educational choice programs than anybody in the country. And in that same time, they've gone from 36 to 17. Georgia, we did two modest programs. We got the special needs scholarship and we've got the tax credit scholarship. And we've gone from 40 to 34. So they're killing us. And I use that illustration over and over to say, you can have both. You can have both. And our economy is so great in Georgia. We're the number one state in the country to do business. We have been, I think, 7 years running. So why can't we be the number one state in which to educate your child? They kind of go hand in hand because businesses want to locate in states where their employees have, great educational options. But man, I'm telling you, it's like pushing a rope uphill.
Well, and when you have more choice, I mean, the studies in Florida, I think there's at least 10 studies on this topic, all finding that in response to that competition from school choice, the public schools get better too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, I mean, it's a win-win situation until you start thinking about the union bosses and just a couple of people and the administrators in the system, but not so much for it's a win for teachers and families and students, but there are some actors where it's not a win.
Well, we don't have unions here, but offline when I talk to a super or especially teachers, they know this is good. They just can't say it out loud in public. And when I taught school, I was a sex education guy. So I'm teaching 8th grade boys, all right, on a very interesting subject to them. But every class I had, there was always 2 or 3 kids who shouldn't have been in there. They weren't ready. Maybe they had a special need. Oftentimes, and I'm not trying to be funny by saying this, okay, but oftentimes they had a parapro with them. And it was typically a lady in her 60s. And here she's come into a classroom with 8th grade boys and a teacher teaching sex ed. And, to act like that doesn't affect the ability of the classroom to move forward and to really educate kids is silly. And if we could even if we just had the kids in the margins and gave them an option, because the environment, for whatever reason, the public school environment's not helping them along, everybody would do better. Because if I could eliminate's too strong a word, but if those 2 or 3 kids could have been in a better environment than those 27 that were left in my classroom, we would have been able to do so much more in the short time I had with them, because I was having to worry about the kids that were falling behind.
So you mentioned a second ago the Georgia Tax Credit Scholarship Program, which already exists, but I hear there's some movement with that bill. Is it Senate Bill 47? Is that an expansion?
That's special needs. Special needs. It expands the definition of special needs. I'll be carrying that bill in the House. It came out of the Senate very tight. I think it had a 2-vote margin. It'll be a tough sell, but basically it just takes our special needs scholarship and expands the definition of special needs a little bit to give access to a good number more of kids. Because we've had that for about 15 years. There's only about 5,000 families taking advantage of it currently. So a lot more families would like to have that opportunity.
So with your colleagues with the House bill, did they propose any type of amendments that would get them to vote for the bill? If so, what were some of those proposals like? Did you actually go ahead and do some of the amendments? Did you lose other people? Was there any of that kind of stuff going on?
There was all of the above. I subbed. They call it subbing whenever you change the bill. We didn't do a technical. You can do amendments in committee. By the time we got to committee, I had subbed the bill, I think 11 times. And some of those were from colleagues, but I met with the superintendents. I met with the school board association. I met with the teachers groups. I spent hours on the phone, and I told them, I said, listen, here's my goal. I know you're not going to support my bill. Okay. But the dream scenario for me would be for you to show up at my bill hearing and say, you know what? We still don't like this bill, but we like it a whole lot more than we did a few weeks ago, because Representative Cantrell is such a reasonable man, and he's met with us. And to be honest, I was surprised. The things they asked for were, aside from dropping the bill altogether, were reasonable. There were some accountability measures, some I forget what all the things were, but it was so funny. The first meeting I had with the school boards and superintendents, they asked for about 7 or 8 things. I gave them all of them. I did all 7 or 8. And then I wrote them a note, sent them the sub, said, hey, great meeting. I've incorporated everything you asked for. And they
still come out against you and send mass emails, with the same energy, no matter what you do.
The mass emails, I don't know why that works. It doesn't work on me. When I get the same email, it's a form email,
Yeah.
I can't hit delete fast enough, but apparently my colleagues, courage is in scarce quantity everywhere, but particularly in politics. I spent the night before my hearing, they started bombarding us with the emails. And so I thought, okay, you're going to send me a form email? I'm going to send you a form email. So I addressed every single thing in the email. And it was a lot. It was probably the equivalent of about 3 full, there I go again, 3 full type pages. And sorry. And so I started replying to everyone. I spent 4 hours. And then teachers started engaging me. And the vast majority of them were like, oh, that's what it does?
Oh, it doesn't get me fired automatically. It doesn't close down my school. There's never been a public school that's closed as a response to school choice programs.
No, of course not. But it was, so it's such an educational process because they've been fed a bunch of garbage about what the bill did. And then when I start telling them what it does, and the final amendment I put on the bill was that as small as the cap was, it would be frozen if the General Assembly did not fully fund QBE, the public school So the whole funding argument was really moot, but it wasn't. Even though I'm saying we're going to fully fund, and then I told them about the whole. Math is hard, and you still get to keep the local and the federal portion. And I've got a study here that shows that on average, for every student that leaves, you gain $3,800. So your per student funding goes up, your class sizes go down, and your schools do better. I mean, your students do better academically.
It's a great deal. It's a great deal. I mean, just imagine if you left a private school and you went to another private school in another state or something, and they got to keep half of your tuition payments each year in perpetuity. Exactly. That would be ridiculous for a private school to expect that, and for anybody to enter into that contract. And it would be ridiculous if you left Walmart, started shopping at Trader Joe's, and Walmart got to keep half your grocery bill each week. That just it's just absurd to even think about. Yet you still have the public schools acting like the sky is falling, even though they're financially benefiting on a per pupil basis based on the funding formulas. Matthew, where did you go on us?
I'm here. We're all having technical difficulties here today.
Okay, cool. Well, we are getting up to close to about a half an hour. Representative Wes Cantrell, do you want to give us some maybe final thoughts? What you want people on the call to on the podcast to main takeaways from the conversation, and maybe what's on the horizon for you when it comes to school choice?
Well, I think it's you just got to focus on the kids. We got to stay focused on the best. What's in the best interest of the child, and we lose that focus so quickly. In 1998, my wife and I and two other couples started the first hybrid school in the state of Georgia, and it now has over 1,000 kids. But it's been a great thing. But it was not for everybody. You go to school 2 days a week, you school at home 3 days a week, and it never crossed my mind to tell people this is the way to do it. It's for everybody. This one size does fit all. It would never cross my mind to do that. And yet, when it comes to public education, the demand is that, this has to work for every single kid. So we just got to keep fighting, Corey. I'm not giving up. I am getting a little bruised on the side of my head. I had so many colleagues that saw me today. Yesterday, we went from 10 a.m. till 11 p.m. And my bill was alive all the way to the very end. I knew it wasn't coming, but I kind of like to tweak the opposition, make them think it's coming. So I kept it alive, even though I knew, we weren't going to bring it, because I'd worked all weekend. I'd called every single one of my colleagues, 103 of them, and trying to, find the votes and see, well, what can I do? How can I get you, and I don't really do transactional politics. I try to win by, the art of persuasion and having a good idea. And plus I'm just not really good at this political thing anyway. So I don't have anything to offer. As far as if I want to do transactional politics, I got nothing, so I got nothing to give you. Here's $10, I have to pay them. We just got to keep fighting, man. We know we're on the right side of this, and we know history is going to show us to be on the right side of this, and it's already showing up in other states. And we're headed to a time where every child's going to have a cafeteria approach to education that's going to best meet their needs, at least as an option. And those parents that don't want to do that, they can stay in the public school, they can stay in a private school, they can do whatever they want. But for those who do, why are we holding them back? It makes no sense whatsoever. So keep on. I love what you guys are doing. I love following you on Twitter. You're able to get away with saying some things that I probably better off not saying.
Absolutely.
But it's just good to know other people are in the fight.
Hey, well, I'm pretty optimistic, and it's great to hear that in Georgia, from what you've talked about on this podcast, that there's momentum going in the right direction. You fought this kind of fight before, and it didn't have the same kind of energy that it had behind it this year. So that's some good news to end on. And I want to thank you again, Representative Wes Cantrell, for agreeing to come on with us and share some of the information from the inside as it pertains to a couple of these bills in Georgia. If anyone wants to go check them out, Representative Cantrell was the primary sponsor on House Bill 60, the Georgia Educational Scholarship Act. And we talked about Senate Bill 47, the Georgia Special Needs Scholarship Act as well, which recently passed the Senate over there in Georgia. So everybody go check that out. I put the links to Representative Cantrell's webpage in the comments. I put the links to the bills in the comments as well. But until next time, thank you all so much. Thank you, Representative Cantrell, for joining us. And thank you, listeners, for catching another episode of the Educational Freedom Institute podcast.